We haven't even begun to skim the surface of the ripple effect that the Supreme Court's decision to overturn Roe v. Wade will have on this country. We don't know, but we can credibly fear just how many people will suffer and in some cases die because of this decision. Abortion advocates in some states, including Louisiana, Texas, Utah, and Kentucky, have already blocked trigger laws from going into effect, at least for now. And while these court challenges are playing out, there's also growing concerns about what banning abortions could mean for birth control, miscarriage care, and even IVF and other assisted reproductive technology, also known as ART. The CDC estimates more than 83,000 children were born via ART in 2019, according to the latest data on its website. As the Washington Post reports, assisted reproductive technologies that bring together eggs and sperm outside of the body to create an embryo will have a highly uncertain legal status unless laws that define life as beginning at fertilization clarify the status of those embryos' creation, storage, and possible destruction. The devil is going to be in the details, especially when it comes to fetal personhood bills. Some states want to grant fetuses, embryos, or fertilized eggs similar rights to children. All of the uncertainty surrounding IVF is already complicating things for fertility care specialists. The Wall Street Journal reports that some fertility doctors are already moving embryos from states like Missouri to states that patients think may be safer for their decision making. Joining me now is Susan Crocken. She's a legal scholar and an adjunct professor at Georgetown's O'Neill Institute for National and Global Health Law. Susan, thank you for being with us today. There's so much to talk about, but I really wanted to focus in today's segment about IVF, or assisted reproductive technologies. The legal landscape left after overturning Roe v. Wade is incredibly complicated, but I think so especially when it comes to IVF. As Newsweek writes, with IVF, it's a common practice to fertilize more than one egg to maximize the chances of the process being successful, though normally only one embryo is returned to the woman's womb to grow and develop. The other fertilized eggs are discarded. So, Susan, do you think that some of these states, the more conservative red ones, right, will they go as far as identifying homicide occurring when you're disposing of those embryos?
Katie, I don't think anyone knows how far these folks are going to try to go in some of these states. It is chilling, the practice of IVF right now, which of course is designed to create families for people who desperately want them by doctors who've developed these technologies to help them do that. I think people are really worried. I don't think anyone knows what may happen in a given state that is absolutely determined to shut down and ensure that every potential embryo, fertilized egg, maybe sperm and egg, deserves to become a child.
Yes, Susan, you know, as I mentioned in the opening to this segment, the devil will be in the details. And we know as a result of Roe, you have this patchwork quilt of inconsistent laws across the United States route, depending upon the state that you're in. So the big question is going to be when and how the bills are going to define an unborn child and whether that begins at fertilization. So in your legal opinion, what would it take for fertility specialists to actually believe it's safe in certain states to continue to do their work? Do you think maybe IVF protections need to be baked into the laws in each state?
It's a great question, and it would certainly be helpful. I think to the extent that any of these laws are defined as affecting pregnancy only, that they won't be going downstream and affecting embryos in labs. On the other hand, it would certainly be helpful. There are some statutes that have tried to carve out IVF and said this doesn't apply. But as you said, the devil's in the details. And if there's language in a statute that's fertilization life begins at fertilization when the sperm hits the egg, and yet we don't mean this to apply to IVF, what do you do with inconsistent information? Mm-hmm. So yes, ideally the statute should say we're not talking about this technology, but we have to wait and see.
Yes, I guess in some ways, Susan, we would be looking out for the carve-outs, right? All of the exceptions to the rule is what you'd be looking for. So, Susan, I have spoken very publicly and transparently about my journey. My daughter was born via IVF. I have 6 fertilized embryos remaining in cryogenesis. So this concept is very personal for me. It's hard to know what to do moving forward. I live in Florida, and even though we have a 15-week abortion law that's going to kick in tomorrow, July 1st, I anticipate the laws to become even more draconian considering who my governor is in Florida. So what is your recommendation for somebody like me to navigate this? Do I just defer to the cryogenesis facility that's maintaining these embryos? Do I go back to my IVF doctor? I mean, where do women go? Women who aren't lawyers, right? Women who don't have access to a lot of information. What do you recommend that they do?
Well, there's a lot of discussion right now about moving embryos to quote unquote blue states and whether or not people want to do that so they don't have to worry about these questions. I would like to think you don't have to worry about them no matter what state you're in, and that, you know, the powers that be will recognize that a fertilized egg in a frozen state is not the same thing as a child, but people are clearly talking about moving their embryos into facilities in other states where they don't have to worry about this. You know, none of these laws so far have gone this far. None of the trigger laws that we're looking at address IVF per se. So for the moment, I don't think that it's necessarily, you know, today's crisis, but I can tell you I'm getting a lot of phone calls from both sides, providers and patients, saying, should we move embryos? You know, and I think it's going to be a legitimate question people are asking.
Well, because, Susan, the reality is it's not just the individual mother, father, right? It's not just that. It's the providers that you mentioned. It's the facilities that are maintaining these embryos in cryogenesis, for example, that are at issue. So I envision several states now becoming embroiled in massive litigation surrounding IVF cases if those bills end up going towards encompassing that. These cases eventually end up before a Supreme Court. We've seen what's happened so far with that conservative Supreme Court, even with Ketanji Brown Jackson replacing Stephen Breyer. How do you anticipate this all playing out in light of that Dobbs decision that came out last week?
Well, I think the scariest thing, I mean, let me just stop for a moment and say, you know, clearly this is a small part of a very big problem. And women who need abortions, who need pregnancy care, they are so impacted. So we're talking about something real, but it is a small percentage of what this opinion has done to women in this country and people who, you know, are affected by it. So I just want to start there. In terms of the Supreme Court, it is very hard to see a court that is talking about unborn human life at its earliest moment, needing and deserving protection, and at the same time applying what we know is the lowest standard, the rational basis for a statute now, saying there is no right for women to have a privacy right over reproduction. It's really hard to see this court stopping anywhere that it doesn't want to stop. There was a petition for cert, which is a request that a court hear a case. You know, the Supreme Court takes cases they want to take, not they don't have to take a case. And a couple of years ago, there was a case they chose not to take in which a woman and her lawyers argued those embryos are children in being, and you need to take that case and make that decision for us. She was fighting over the embryos with her divorcing husband. I think about a case like that, and I say, if that came into this court, composed of the judges it's composed of, I'm not sure they would turn away from it.
Susan, and Justice Clarence Thomas's concurrence, I understand it was just his and no one joined it, but it definitely portends very poorly and scarily for what the potential is for privacy rights for Americans in the event maybe a case like that ends up on the docket. Susan Kropotkin, thank you for your time. We look forward to having you back. Thank you so much.
Thank you.